One of the most versatile areas in any space for makers, be that your garage or a place like Factory 2, is going to be the wood shop. The most interesting part of the wood shop is that it opens every door, and the door is made. There is nothing that's going to be in the physical world that you can't at least begin prototyping here. And it is so fast because wood is, again, incredibly versatile while also being wonderfully forgiving. The ability to take ideas, remix them together, use the parts that work well, and implement those in other projects. The wood shop is a place for cleverness to be made into a physical thing. When it comes to things like graphic design, building an idea inside of a computer, laser cutting using intense light to carefully edit things, there's a learning curve there. And though everything has a learning curve, working with wood is one of those things that really you can just start doing. You can just start messing around with wood and learn a lot of what you need to learn just by paying attention to what's happening. And you can do this with a very simple range of tools. In fact, the tools I have laid out here are, for me, the baseline tools for woodworking, but you can definitely get by with less than this. I would say absolutely essential to getting started would be some method of making things not move when you want them to not move, some method of moving things around on a large scale, and some method of moving things around on a small scale. If you have those three things, you are ready to get going. That said, there are a couple of other really useful, very important pieces. I have them arranged here in rough relationship to one another because the tools will wind up doing double duty, and so to put them in any one category is misleading. Instead, it's best to understand what they do and how they do it, and then you can start asking the right questions of the material at hand, the stock, your wood, the desk that you need to repair, whatever it is. Fundamental to most woodworking tasks, something to mark with that you can easily sand off later, some method of registering the locations of things to one another. Because that's an incredibly important thing to know about woodworking is almost always what we're doing is carefully disassembling stock into smaller pieces and then taking those pieces and building them back up into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. A method of keeping two things from moving relative to one another, wood glue is a great option. The next thing is some sort of thumper or whacker or mallet, some weight that's on the end of a stick. This is one of the fundamental tools of humanity. It is the idea of taking a weight, putting it a little bit farther away from our hand so that we get this pivot point, and then using that to edit the world around us. This is the reason that we are at the top of the food chain, the fact that we were able to come up with this idea. And you'll note, you don't even need to buy one of these. This one is made out of the pine tree next to my driveway. It is a piece of one of the branches that I cut off, cut that into 3 pieces using a saw, and then I took that center piece, took out a chunk in kind of a V shape. I think I made the handle entirely using a cooking saw and sandpaper, and that's it. We put it together, and this has seen me through literally hundreds and hundreds of projects. Marking and knowing things through time, that's what these are about. You make a mark so that you don't have to keep your eye right there. You can go do something else, come back and look at that mark and be like, that's where I need to do. Keeping knowledge through time, that's what these are about. Making things not move relative to one another. Encouraging things to move relative to one another. And the next two are pretty hazy to separate the categories from one another, but in general, there is removing material either from the parent stock or from a piece that you're working on, and then a much finer version of that, which is sanding and finishing. You have tools for finishing, which is kind of these. You have tools for separating, which is kind of these. You have tools for moving things. You have tools to make sure that things don't move. And then you have tools to know knowledge from the past in the present moment and communicate that into the future. The next category of tools are the separators. This is, as I said, one of the two main things that we're almost always doing in woodworking. We're either removing from the parent stock to get the piece that we intend to have, or we are connecting pieces that we have created to create whatever it is that we're looking for, be that a tissue box or the mock-up of a dune buggy that you might want to build and you want to see it in real world, shelving for a book collection, whatever it is. Removing material in careful, predictable ways is the next category. This is a coping saw. A coping saw is used primarily for making detailed cuts, often internal tight angles, because you see how thin the blade is here. You can even remove the blade, thread it through a hole that is in an object, and you continue to cut inside of the piece in a way that a saw like this just never would be capable of. The Japanese pole saw is my personal favorite for editing wood with both accuracy and alacrity. It is incredible what speed you can get out of this particular tool. In the West, we have the Western saw with the handle. It cuts on the push stroke. This, on the other hand, cuts on the pull stroke. So instead of pushing it through the material like that and getting a bunch of sawdust out, instead it cuts as a flat. The next two tools are somewhere between removing and finishing. And a lot of finishing is removing until you get to the point of adding tung oil or paint or stains. But these are both somewhere between removing and finishing, which is why the categories are vague ideas, but they're useful to know about. This is a chisel. This is an inch chisel. I highly recommend that you grab a chisel. You only need one or two to begin with, and then once you get into it, you'll know why you need others. And if you don't, one of the cool things about hanging out at Factory 2, we can help you advance your woodworking capabilities to the point that you have opinions about what kind of chisel that you have, what kind of bevel you want on the sides of your chisel. Do you want it to be relieved or not? Do you want it to be these kind of plastic intended to be hit with the metal cap? Or do you want to lay out your own chisel in? Whatever it is that you want, you can start investigating it. But to begin the process of investigating, I really do think that you should get a chisel. This is one of the most powerful pieces of technology we've ever come up with. The chisel is used to remove material. It is also easily used to make very, very nice flat surfaces. It is surprising what you can get out of just using a chisel. The two largest investments when you first get started with woodworking are probably going to be the bench and some sort of vise. This is a woodworking vise. You don't have to have one of these. You can use just a regular mechanics vise and then replace these pieces. These are called the cheats of the vise. You can just make your own out of wood. Scrap wood is perfectly acceptable, and then bolt those onto the inside of the vise, and it won't scar the stock that you're clamping up to work on it. But some method of holding what you're working on is absolutely essential. That said, you can totally do this just by putting it on top of a sturdy log or something and kneeling on it as you are using your chisel down here, while kneeling down at this end. There's no reason you can't get started in that fashion. And then you build yourself your own workbench doing that. And then once you have the workbench, usually you're gonna have to buy the vise, but luckily, if you're a member of Factory 2, you can come and just use ours and learn all kinds of cool tricks about how they work, their utility that it's difficult to see right out of the gate, all kinds of great stuff. A bench plane is intended to remove a lot more material in a much more predictable fashion, which is why there's the sole on it, so that that sole, as it rides, provides the pressure to keep the blade from diving into the wood. The bench plane and the chisel are thought of as removal tools, not really as finishing, but again, it's something that you can just go explore. It is a fascinating thing that you will be able to learn a lot about just by doing it. Just try it out. And again, the versatility and power of wood is incredible. So you don't have to go buy wood, just find scrap wood. In the trash is fine. Disassemble a desk that somebody is throwing out and see what that's made of. Pick up dead limbs and take the bark off in one of 1,000 ways, and then just start moving the wood around and see what's going on. That is the beginning of why the wood shop is so powerful. The last thing is some kind of sandpaper. This is because you can edit wood quite accurately here and even more accurately here, but not nearly as accurately as you can with just a piece of sandpaper. Of course, the sandpaper takes a lot more time, and that's the trade-off. And speaking of which, that is the trade-off between hand tools and power tools. So let's go take a look at those. The three things that give power tools an advantage over hand tools are predictability, repeatability, and speed. So if you were trying to make something fast, or it has to be very precise, or you need it to be done a lot, power tools are generally a good option to look into at the very least. That's not to say that you can't do it with hand tools, but the ability to set a fence exactly as far away from the blade as you need it to be and cut 36 of that part, really, the power of that can't be overstated. Lathe work is for making things like you see on this lathe tool. That is, things that are similar rotationally, which is incredibly important to a lot of the ways that we build the world around us. The chair you're sitting in likely has rotationally symmetrical pieces. A pencil, not that a pencil is made on the lathe, but still rotationally symmetrical. And so it's an idea that is important to us that is harder to do with not a lathe. Again, not impossible because everything can be done in 1,000 ways. These three tools will often be used in conjunction with one another. This is a table saw, this is a jointer, and this is a thickness planer. Usually what you do is you take your stock and you use this machine to make two adjoining sides of that stock, both very, very flat, and also an exact 90 degree to one another. Then once you have two good reference sides, you can run it through here to make the other face exactly parallel and the same distance, therefore, by definition, away from the first jointed face. And then you bring it over here, set this up for the width of piece you actually need to get out of the stock, clamp down your fence, run it through with the previously jointed side up against this, giving you an exact size, as well as two very, very square faces. They will be quite parallel to one another if the jointing has gone well, and then you will have two sides and two faces that are 90 degrees off from one another and very smooth and flat. That's a good place to get started with more advanced woodworking. You don't need it to begin, but it's important to know that it can be done. That said, the versatility of these tools is really only limited by human intuition. One of the versatility of these tools is really only limited by human cleverness. One of the base additional tools for many of the things in this room, actually, not just the table saw, but for the table saw at least, is this. It's called a miter gauge. And what the miter gauge allows us to do is take a piece of wood, hold it up against the miter gauge, and now we know that this piece of wood is moving directly towards that it is perpendicular, its movement. That the wood is perpendicular to the blade and that its movement is exactly parallel. This is incredibly important oftentimes. This is very important oftentimes, and without if you're trying to do this, first, it's just unsafe because you are so much closer. You have two hands close to the blade, you're on either side of the blade. If anything comes out, it kicks back towards you. But also, there's just no way that you're gonna be able to hold it steady. And you definitely don't wanna do this, ever. Even if it feels like this might be a good idea, creating pressure between the blade as it's moving, because the blade is spinning this way towards you, and the fence, on this kind of cut, you never want to do that. And so it's one of the things that the miter gauge is for. There's also things called a cross-cut sled, many other types of sleds as well. And again, the limitation here is just human cleverness. You can add so much utility to this machine, the bandsaw, even the chop saw, by thinking just a little bit clever with jigs and extra pieces of wood, because again, wood is just so incredibly versatile. We can build what we need out of the stuff with which we are building, which I love. Two more machines that are super important. One is the drum sander. This is sandpaper that spins very, very fast and very square to this table. Some distance away, the distance could be edited with a screw, and so you get a very nice finish and a very flat piece off of it. The last, and perhaps to any serious woodworker, especially if you're doing production level stuff, is the router table. A router is absolutely essential to the project of finished woodworking, really. You don't, I say essential, you don't have to have one. You can absolutely do beautiful work without it. But if you're going to be doing high volume, or if you are looking to get high repeatability, that's what power tools are about. Repeatability, predictability, as well as speed. All right, hopefully you were interested in learning more either about the power tools or, don't tell anyone I said this, my favorite, the hand tools. Come in, ask questions, call us to see if a project can be done, take a tour. It's just a cool place to be, and the thoughts you can think once you know what the tools do will amaze you. Hope to see you soon.